The sole survivor's terrifying confession. What we found in the woods. Hello and welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. What I'm about to share with you is not a story. It's a confession, a testament, a warning. I've spent months, maybe years now, the days blur together, piecing together my memories, trying to separate the real from the nightmarish. But it was all real. I know it was. My name is Alex, and I am the sole survivor of an event that should never have happened. An event that proves we are not alone, and that our world is fragile. A thin sheet of ice over an ocean of unfathomable darkness. This recording is my protocol. My attempt to document the truth before it's lost forever, or before I am. So I ask you to listen closely. Turn down the lights. Silence your notifications. And try to understand. What we found in the park that night, it didn't just crash. Tore a hole in our reality. And through that hole something crawled out. It started, as these things often do, with a mundane Tuesday. September. The air in our small town of Havenwood was just beginning to carry the crisp promise of autumn. Life was predictable. School, work, weekends spent chasing boredom away with cheap beer and loud music. My circle was small, but it was solid. There was Liam, my best friend since kindergarten. A pragmatist with a steady hand and a skeptical mind. There was Maya, Liam's girlfriend, fiercely intelligent and the unofficial leader of our group. And then there was Chloe, my sister, a free spirit who saw art and wonder in everything. The counterbalance to Liam's cynicism. That night, we were gathered at our usual spot, a scenic overlook on Miller's Ridge, the highest point in Havenwood. From there, you could see the entire town, a constellation of warm, inviting lights. Below us, nestled in the heart of the valley, was Northwood Park, a sprawling expanse of old-growth forest that the town had wisely left untouched. It was our sanctuary, our playground, our wilderness. Liam was trying to get a small bonfire going, cursing the damp wood. Maya was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the cold blue light, while Chloe was attempting to map the constellations with a stargazing app. I was just there, soaking it in. The smell of pine and damp earth, the distant hum of the town, the vast, inky canvas of the night sky above. It was peaceful, deceptively so. There's supposed to be a meteor shower tonight, Chloe announced, her voice filled with her typical enthusiasm. The Draconids. Not the most spectacular, but still. Liam grunted, finally coaxing a flicker of flame from the kindling. A bunch of space dust burning up. Thrilling. Oh, shut up, Liam, Maya said without looking up from her phone. Let her have her space dust. We fell into a comfortable silence, watching the fire grow. A tiny sun in the vast darkness. The air was still, unnaturally still. The usual nighttime chorus of crickets and distant animals was absent. It was a detail I'd only recognize in hindsight, one of the many small, wrong things that night. And then we saw it. It wasn't a meteor. I've seen shooting stars my whole life. They are silent, fleeting streaks of silver. This was different. It was a point of light, high in the atmosphere, moving with a purpose that felt wrong. It wasn't falling. It was descending. It glowed with an emerald green light, a color I've never seen in nature, pulsating softly like a diseased heart. Whoa, look at that, Chloe whispered, her phone forgotten in her lap. We all looked up. The light grew larger, brighter, as it dropped through the layers of the atmosphere. And then came the sound. It wasn't a roar, not an explosion. It was a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate in your very bones. It was the sound of something tearing through the air, something that didn't belong there. What the hell is that? Liam said, his skepticism finally cracking. He stood up, his face a mask of confusion. The green light pulsed faster, erratically, and the object began to wobble, its descent becoming less of a controlled landing and more of a catastrophic failure. It was moving fast, heading directly for the dark expanse of Northwood Park. The hum intensified, becoming a piercing shriek that made us cover our ears. It was a sound of immense pressure, of metal or something like it being tortured beyond its limits. Then, as the object disappeared below the treeline, the shriek was cut short. We saw a flash of brilliant green light illuminate the entire park from within, silhouetting the ancient trees against the night sky. It was followed by a deep, resonant boom that rolled through the valley and shook the ground beneath our feet. The bonfire flickered wildly, and a flock of birds, startled from their roosts, erupted from the forest in a panic. And then silence, a heavy, profound silence that was more terrifying than the noise it replaced. We stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. The green glow from the park had vanished, replaced by an unnerving darkness. Did a plane just crash? Chloe's voice was shaky. Liam shook his head, his eyes wide. No plane looks like that, or sounds like that. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just seen. It was impossible, and yet it had happened. 1,000 rational explanations tried to surface a military drone, a weather balloon, a satellite falling from orbit, but none of them fit. The color, the sound, the way it moved, it was alien. "We have to go down there," Maya said, her voice firm, cutting through our collective shock. She was already grabbing her jacket. "Are you insane?" Liam shot back. "We don't know what that was. We should call the police." "And tell them what?" Maya challenged. "That a green UFO just crashed in the park? They'll think we're drunk or high. By the time they take us seriously and get down there, who knows what will have happened? Or what will be gone?" She had a point. The absurdity of the situation was a shield for whatever had just happened. But fear is a powerful deterrent. The woods were dark on a normal night. Now, knowing what lay within them, they seemed like a gaping maw. I looked at Chloe. She was pale, her eyes fixed on the darkness where the object had fallen. But there was a flicker of something else in her gaze, not just fear, but an intense, burning curiosity. It was the same curiosity I felt gnawing at the edges of my own terror. This was the most important event in human history, happening right in our backyard. How could we not go? "Maya's right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We have to see. We'll be careful. We'll stick together. If it's anything dangerous, we get out immediately." Liam looked between the three of us, his pragmatic defenses crumbling against our united front. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is a terrible idea, a monumentally, epically stupid idea, but I'm not letting you three go alone." And so the decision was made. Armed with nothing but our flashlights and a potent mixture of fear and adrenaline, we descended from Miller's Ridge. We were four insignificant specks, walking down a dark road towards a mystery that would consume us all. We thought we were the observers, the discoverers. We had no idea that we were walking into a trap, one that had been set billions of years before we were born. The wilderness was waiting, and it had a new, terrible secret to keep. The path into Northwood Park was familiar to us. We'd spent our childhoods running these trails, building forts, and telling ghost stories. But that night it was transformed. The air was thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The familiar woods felt alien, hostile. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through me. We moved in a tight diamond formation, Liam in the lead, me and Chloe in the middle, and Maya watching our backs. Our flashlight beams cut sharp, nervous cones through the oppressive darkness. The silence was still absolute. No crickets, no owls, no signs of life. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. As we ventured deeper, a smell hit us. It was acrid and sterile, like ozone after a lightning strike, but with a strange, metallic undertone that I couldn't place. It was the smell of something burnt and unnatural. "Do you guys smell that?" Chloe whispered, pulling her jacket over her nose. "Yeah," Liam muttered. "Smells like a hospital on fire." The terrain started to slope downwards, and we knew we were getting close to the crash site. The evidence was all around us. Trees were snapped in half, their splintered trunks pointing accusingly at the sky. A deep, wide furrow was carved into the forest floor, a violent scar of displaced earth and shredded vegetation. It looked like a giant plow had torn through the woods. And then we saw it. At the end of the furrow, nestled in a newly formed crater, was the object. It was wrong, in every conceivable way. My mind struggled to categorize it, to find a frame of reference, but there was none. It was not a machine of metal and rivets and wires. It looked grown. The hull was a patchwork of iridescent, obsidian-like material and something that resembled fibrous, petrified muscle. It was impossibly black, seeming to drink the light from our flashlights. There were no straight lines, no hard angles. It was a symphony of jarring, organic curves and biomechanical sinews. The object was roughly wedge-shaped, maybe 30 feet long, and was buried nose first in the earth. It was fractured, torn open in several places. From one of the larger breaches, a faint, sickly green light pulsed, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. A thick, viscous fluid, the color of crude oil, oozed from the wounds in its hull, sizzling as it dripped onto the damp earth. We stood at the edge of the crater, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what we were seeing. This was not a drone. This was not from our world. The proof was right there, bleeding into the soil of our quiet little park. "My God," Maya breathed, her voice a mixture of awe and terror. Liam, for the first time in his life, was speechless. He just stared, his flashlight beam trembling. Chloe, ever the artist, was the first to find her voice again, though it was barely a whisper. It's beautiful." "I didn't see beauty. I saw a violation. Something profoundly alien and ancient had violently inserted itself into our world." The air hummed with a low-frequency vibration that I could feel in my teeth. The smell was stronger here, overwhelming my senses. My reporter's instinct, a leftover from my brief stint in journalism school, kicked in. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so much I could barely operate it. I started recording, panning across the scene, the crater, the impossible object. I needed to document this. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. "What are you doing?" Liam hissed. "Documenting," I replied, my voice hoarse. "No one will believe us without proof." As my phone's camera focused on the main breach in the hull, the pulsing green light within flickered. And then we heard a sound from inside the wreckage. It was a soft, wet, scraping noise, and it was followed by a low, guttural moan. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but of pain, of suffering. We froze, our blood turning to ice. We were not alone. "There's something alive in there," Chloe whispered, taking a half-step forward. "Chloe, no." I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. The moaning sound came again, weaker this time, more pathetic. It was the sound of a mortally wounded animal. A conflict erupted within me, a war between primal fear and a deeply ingrained sense of empathy. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But that sound, it tugged at something human inside me. Maya seemed to be feeling the same conflict. "It sounds like it's hurt. It's an alien," Liam finally exploded, his voice a harsh whisper. "We don't know what it is, what it can do. For all we know, that sound is how it lures its prey. He was right. Logically, he was absolutely right. But logic had deserted us the moment we saw the green light in the sky. We were operating on a different level now, a plane of pure, instinctual reaction. Ignoring Liam's protests, I moved cautiously towards the edge of the crater, my phone still recording. I had to see. I had to know. The others followed, their curiosity overriding their fear. We crept down the loose soil of the crater's edge, our feet slipping on the damp earth. The smell was suffocating now. The low hum from the object vibrated through the soles of my shoes. I peered into the breach. The interior of the craft was a nightmare of tangled, organic-looking structures and shattered crystalline conduits that pulsed with the faint green light. It looked like the inside of some colossal biomechanical creature. And there, tangled in a mess of what looked like fibrous cables, was the source of the sound. It was a single, surviving occupant. My mind reeled. It was humanoid in its basic structure: a torso, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But that's where the similarities ended. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent gray, and it seemed to shimmer, even in the dim light. It was tall and painfully thin, its limbs long and delicate, ending in slender, 3-fingered hands. There were no visible eyes, no nose, just a smooth, featureless face that was currently contorted in what I could only interpret as agony. A deep gash ran across its torso, from which a dark, almost black fluid was sluggishly seeping. It moaned again, a soft, pitiful sound, and one of its long, delicate arms twitched feebly. It was helpless, wounded, dying. All the fear, all the paranoia, was momentarily washed away by a wave of pity. This wasn't a monster. It was a castaway, a victim of a catastrophe just like anyone would be in a car crash. "We have to help it," Chloe said, her voice filled with a conviction that startled me. "Help it," Liam scoffed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "Chloe, have you lost your mind? We need to get out of here, now, and call someone. The military, the FBI, I don't care who. And what do they do when they find it?" Maya countered, her gaze fixed on the wounded creature. "They'll take it to a lab. They'll cut it up. They'll treat it like a specimen, not a survivor. Look at it, Liam. It's dying." The creature's featureless face turned slowly towards the sound of our voices. It made no move, no threat. It just existed, a silent, suffering presence. I was torn. My rational mind screamed in agreement with Liam. This was out of our league. We were in over our heads, playing with forces we couldn't possibly comprehend. But my heart, my foolish human heart, sided with Maya and Chloe. We had stumbled upon a life, a sentient being, in its most vulnerable moment. To abandon it to a cold, clinical fate, or to just let it die alone in the dark, it felt monstrous. Felt inhuman. I made a decision that would seal our fate. A decision that I replay in my mind every single day. "We're not leaving it," I said, my voice firm. "We're taking it with us." The silence that followed my declaration was heavier than any we had experienced that night. Liam looked at me as if I had just pronounced our death sentence. Maybe I had. But in that moment, standing at the edge of the impossible, it felt like the only choice we could make. The only human choice. We had found a crashed, non-human object in the park. And there was a single survivor. Our story, our horror, was just beginning. The logistics of our decision were a nightmare. How do you move a wounded, 7-foot-tall alien from a crash site in the middle of a public park without being seen? The answer was, with a great deal of difficulty and an even greater amount of luck. Liam, despite his vehement protests, was a man of action. Once the decision was made, his practical nature took over. Okay, he sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. If we're going to do this monumentally stupid thing, we're going to do it smart. First, no more lights than absolutely necessary. We don't want to attract attention. We worked in the eerie green glow from the wreckage and the single, low-beam flashlight Maya held. The first challenge was extricating the creature from the tangled mess inside the ship. Its long limbs were caught in what looked like thick, rubbery cables that seemed to have partially fused with its skin. I'll never forget the feeling of its skin. I had to help untangle one of its arms. It was cool to the touch and smooth, like polished marble, but with a strange underlying resilience like dense rubber. It was completely alien, yet the way it flinched when we touched a sensitive spot, the low moan that escaped it was universally recognizable as pain. It was surprisingly light for its size. Once we freed it, Liam and I were able to carry it, him taking the torso and me the legs. It was an awkward, macabre procession. Two terrified young men carrying a wounded alien through a dark forest. Maya and Chloe acted as our lookouts, scanning the woods for any sign of other people. Every step was a struggle, both physically and mentally. My mind was a battlefield. One part of me was screaming at the absurdity and the danger of what we were doing. The other was consumed by a profound sense of awe and responsibility. We were carrying a secret that could change the world. The creature was mostly passive during the journey. It was conscious, I think. Its smooth, featureless face would occasionally turn towards me, and I felt a strange, unnerving sensation, like it was looking at me, through me, despite its lack of eyes. It was a purely psychic pressure, a weight of attention that was deeply unsettling. Our destination was a place of last resort, a secret of our own. An old, abandoned hunting cabin that belonged to my grandfather. It was deep in the woods, miles from the park, and hadn't been used in years. It was dilapidated, isolated, and most importantly, forgotten. It was the perfect place to hide a secret. The journey took hours. We had to move slowly, carefully, avoiding the main trails. By the time we reached the cabin, the first hints of dawn were beginning to break, painting the eastern sky in shades of gray and purple. We were exhausted, caked in mud and the creature's dark, viscous blood. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it. A single-room log structure, sagging and weathered, with a large stone fireplace and a few pieces of rotting furniture. It smelled of dust, decay, and damp wood. But it was shelter. It was seclusion. We laid the creature down on my grandfather's old cot, its long limbs dangling over the edges. In the growing light of dawn, we got our first proper look at it. The gray skin seemed to have a faint, pearlescent quality, shifting in color as the light hit it. The wound on its torso was gruesome, a deep, jagged tear that continued to ooze the black fluid. It was breathing, I think. Its chest rose and fell in a slow, shallow rhythm. Now that the adrenaline of the escape had faded, the full weight of our situation crashed down on us. We were in a remote cabin with a wounded extraterrestrial being. We had no idea what it needed, what it was capable of, or if its very presence was somehow toxic to us. The debate that had started in the park reignited, this time with more intensity. Okay, we got it here. Now what? Liam demanded, pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. We can't keep it here forever. It needs, I don't know, alien medicine? What are we supposed to do? Put a bandage on it. We need to clean the wound, at least, Maya said, her medical instincts kicking in. She was a pre-med student, and her calm, analytical approach was a stark contrast to Liam's panic. There's an old water pump outside. We can boil some water. We have a first aid kit in the car. You're going to touch it? Liam stared at her, horrified. Maya, we don't know what that black stuff is. Could be radioactive for all we know. We could get some kind of space disease. And what's the alternative, Liam? Chloe retorted, her voice sharp. Let it die of infection on this cot? We made the choice to bring it here. We can't just let it suffer. I didn't choose this. Liam shot back, his voice rising. I told you this was a bad idea. But you're here, Liam, I said, stepping between them. We're all here. Arguing isn't going to help. Maya's right. We need to try to help it. But you're also right. We need to be careful. We reached a tense compromise. Maya would tend to the creature, but she would wear gloves and be as careful as possible. Liam and I would go back to my car, which we had left parked on a dirt road near the park, and retrieve supplies. The first aid kit, blankets, food, and water for ourselves. Chloe would stay and keep watch. Leaving the cabin felt like stepping out of a dream and back into the real world. The sun was up now, and the forest looked normal again. Birds were singing. It was hard to believe that just a few hundred yards away, an alien was lying wounded in a dusty old cabin. When we returned, we found Chloe sitting on the floor, a few feet away from the cot, sketching the creature in a small notebook. It made a sound, she said, her voice hushed. Not a moan. Something different, like a clicking sound, almost like it was trying to talk. My blood ran cold. The idea of communication, of this creature having a consciousness, a language, was both thrilling and terrifying. Maya had managed to clean the wound. She had used boiled water and antiseptic wipes from the first aid kit. The creature had remained still throughout the process, its only reaction a slight tensing of its limbs. It's blood, it's strange, Maya said, holding up a blood-soaked cloth. It's thick, almost like tar, and it doesn't seem to be clotting properly. We spent the rest of the day in a state of surreal suspense. We took turns watching the creature, speaking in hushed tones, jumping at every sound from the forest outside. We were completely cut off from the world. No cell service, no internet, just the four of us and our impossible secret. The creature remained mostly motionless, its breathing slow and steady. But there were subtle things. The way its featureless face would turn towards whoever was speaking, the soft, clicking sounds it would occasionally make, and a strange, low hum that seemed to emanate from its body, a vibration that you could feel in the air around it. As night fell on our first full day in the cabin, a new kind of fear began to set in. The adrenaline had worn off completely, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. We were trapped in this small space with an unknown being. The darkness outside felt menacing, no longer a familiar comfort, but a veil for unseen threats. We tried to establish a watch schedule. Liam, ever the pragmatist, insisted on it. But none of us could really sleep. We would doze off in chairs, only to be jolted awake by a creak in the cabin walls or a particularly loud click from the cot. It was during my watch in the dead of night that the first truly strange thing happened. I was sitting at the small wooden table, watching the creature's still form in the flickering light of a single lantern. The cabin was silent, save for the creature's soft breathing and the sound of my own heartbeat. And then I heard a voice in my head. It wasn't a sound. It was a thought that wasn't mine. It was clear and precise, and it spoke a single word: cold. I froze, my eyes darting around the empty cabin. Liam and Maya were asleep in their chairs. Chloe was curled up in a blanket on the floor. The voice was not from any of them. I looked at the creature on the cot. His face was turned towards me. Cold. The thought came again, more insistent this time. It was tinged with a feeling of discomfort, of suffering. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was I imagining it? Was I so sleep-deprived and stressed that my mind was playing tricks on me? I remembered the blankets we had brought from the car. Acting on an impulse I didn't understand, I grabbed one, a thick wool blanket, and gently draped it over the creature's body. As the blanket settled over it, the feeling of pressure in my head vanished. The alien thought was gone. And then, a new one bloomed in its place. A feeling more than a word. A sense of gratitude, of relief. I stumbled back to the table, my legs weak. This was not just a wounded animal. It was intelligent. It was telepathic. And it was communicating with me. I didn't tell the others. How could I? They would think I was crazy. Liam would have us out of there in a second. So I kept my secret, just as we were all keeping our collective one. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that everything had just changed. We hadn't just brought a survivor into our lives. We had brought in a power and intelligence that we could not hope to control. The cabin was no longer our sanctuary. It was its domain, and we were trapped in it with it. The true horror had not been the crash or the discovery. It was the slow, creeping realization of what we had brought into our world. And it was just beginning. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of fear and vigilance. The cabin, once a symbol of refuge, became our prison. Its wooden walls seemed to shrink around us, the single room a pressure cooker for our fraying nerves. The outside world, with its sunlight and normalcy, felt a million miles away. We were in our own little bubble of impossibility, and the air was growing thin. The creature, which Chloe had started calling Silas, a name she'd plucked from a book she'd read about forest spirits, grew stronger. The gash on its torso began to close, not healing in the way human flesh does, but knitting itself together with a network of fine, dark fibers. The black blood ceased to flow. Its breathing deepened, becoming more regular. It was recovering, and as its physical strength returned, its other abilities began to manifest in more profound and unsettling ways. The telepathic communication, my secret terror, continued. It was never a conversation. It was more like emotional bleeding. Fragments of sensation, abstract images, and raw feelings would bleed into my thoughts without warning. I would be trying to eat a can of cold beans and suddenly be overwhelmed by a sense of immense, cosmic loneliness, a sorrow so profound it felt like drowning. I would be looking out the window and my mind would be filled with the image of a sky with two suns, or a landscape of crystalline trees. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, sleep deprivation, paranoia. But I knew it was real. I started to see a correlation between the creature's state and the broadcasts. When it was still, I would get these flashes of its world, its memories perhaps. But when it was agitated, the feelings were more primal. Hunger, fear, confusion. And I wasn't the only one being affected. We all were in different ways. Maya, the scientist, became obsessed. She spent hours watching Silas, documenting every subtle change in its condition, every twitch of its long fingers, every shift in the pearlescent hue of its skin. She filled a notebook with meticulous observations, her handwriting growing more frantic with each passing day. She was losing her clinical detachment, replaced by a feverish, almost manic curiosity. Liam, on the other hand, was deteriorating. His pragmatic nature couldn't cope with the sustained impossibility of our situation. He became withdrawn, paranoid. He would spend hours cleaning his hunting knife, his knuckles white. He was convinced we were being watched, that they were coming for us. He would report seeing strange lights in the woods at night, hearing sounds that the rest of us couldn't hear. We dismissed it as his paranoia, but a part of me wondered if he was tuning into something we weren't. Chloe was perhaps the most changed. Her initial empathy had deepened into a strange, quasi-religious reverence. She would sit near the cot for hours, not sketching anymore, but just being with it. She claimed she could feel its thoughts, that Silas was not a monster, but a poet, a philosopher, a lost soul. She would talk to it in soft, soothing tones, telling it about our world, about art and music and the color of the sky. One evening, she was sitting by the cot, humming a melody, a simple, haunting tune she had made up. As she hummed, the lantern on the table began to flicker in time with the melody. We all saw it. The flame danced and pulsed, perfectly synchronized with her humming. Liam jumped to his feet. "What was that? What did you do?" Chloe looked at the lantern, her eyes wide with wonder. I don't know. I was just humming." She looked at Silas. "It likes music." The connection between them was growing, and it scared me more than Liam's paranoia or Maya's obsession. It was an unnatural bond, a link between a human girl and a being from another star. The environment of the cabin itself began to change. A strange, faint mold, the color of rust, started to grow in the corners of the room. It spread in fractal patterns, like frost on a window pane, and no matter how much we scrubbed it away, it would return overnight, thicker than before. The air grew heavy and humid, carrying a faint, sweet, cloying odor, like overripe fruit and decay. Technology had become completely unreliable. Our flashlights would flicker and die, even with fresh batteries. My phone, which I had hoped to use to document everything, was now just a useless brick. The only thing that worked consistently was the old lantern, and its flame now seemed to dance to a rhythm of its own. The shared nightmares started about a week in. They were always the same. We were in a vast, dark space, floating. All around us were other beings, identical to Silas, all of them silent, still, and connected by threads of faint light. We could feel their collective consciousness, a silent, patient, waiting intelligence. And then, a sound would shatter the silence, a terrible, grinding noise, and our world would be torn apart. We would wake up screaming, covered in a cold sweat, the feeling of cosmic dread clinging to us like a shroud. We were falling apart. The bonds of our friendship, once so strong, were fraying under the constant strain. We argued over everything: how to ration our dwindling food supplies, whether we should risk a trip back to town, what to do about Silas. The creature on the cot, silent and still, had become the epicenter of our own personal apocalypse. One afternoon, Liam and I got into a heated argument. He wanted to leave, to take his chances and hike back to town, to tell someone, anyone, what was happening. "I can't do this anymore, Alex," he said, his voice ragged. "This place, it's wrong. It's changing us. Can't you feel it? And what do you think will happen if you go back?" I countered, my own temper flaring. "They'll lock you up in a padded room. No one will believe you. And what about them? The ones who crashed the ship? You think they're not looking for their survivor? You walk out that door, you could lead them right to us." Our shouting match was interrupted by a sound from the cot. It was a new sound, one we hadn't heard before. A series of sharp, resonant clicks, followed by a low, guttural vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. We all turned to look at Silas. It was stirring. Its long, slender fingers were flexing and unflexing. Its head, its smooth, featureless face, lifted from the pillow. And then it sat up. The movement was fluid, graceful, and utterly terrifying. It sat on the edge of the cot, its feet touching the wooden floor for the first time. It was so tall that its head nearly touched the ceiling beams. We stood frozen, a tableau of pure terror. No one breathed. No one moved. Silas slowly turned its head, looking at each of us in turn. The psychic pressure in the room was immense, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. It felt like standing in the presence of a god, or a demon. His gaze stopped on Chloe. She, unlike the rest of us, did not look terrified. She looked enraptured. A soft, clicking sound emanated from Silas, and Chloe took a step forward. "Chloe, don't," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. But Chloe didn't seem to hear her. She walked slowly towards the creature, her hand outstretched. "You're not going to hurt us," she said, her voice filled with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. "You're scared. You're alone. I understand." She reached out and placed her hand on the creature's arm. The moment she made contact, two things happened simultaneously. First, every light source in the cabin, the lantern, our dying flashlights, extinguished at once, plunging us into absolute darkness. Second, an image exploded in my mind, so vivid and real that I cried out. It wasn't a memory or a feeling. It was a live feed. I was looking through Chloe's eyes. I saw the creature's arm, its pale, shimmering skin under her hand. I felt the cool, smooth texture of its flesh. And then I looked up into its featureless face and I saw what she saw. Not a blank slate, but a swirling vortex of nebulae and stars. A universe of knowledge and sorrow contained within that smooth, gray visage. I felt her awe, her lack of fear, her complete and utter surrender to this being. And then I felt a new emotion, an emotion that was not hers, but the creature's. It was a cold, analytical curiosity, a feeling of assessment, of tasting, of learning. The vision shattered, and the light from the lantern sputtered back to life, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Chloe was still standing there, her hand on the creature's arm, a look of ecstatic wonder on her face. But something was wrong. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged with blue. She looked drained, weakened. Silas slowly retracted its arm. It stood up, unfolding to its full, terrifying height. It took a single, slow step away from the cot. It was no longer a wounded survivor. It was something else, something powerful. And we were locked in a tiny wooden box with it, deep in a forest that had forgotten we existed. The seclusion was over. The true nightmare was about to begin. The creature Celeste was now ambulatory. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was both beautiful and deeply unnerving. It would pace the length of the small cabin, its long, silent strides eating up the space, making our world feel even smaller. Its presence was overwhelming, a constant, silent pressure that kept our nerves stretched to the breaking point. It no longer seemed to need rest. It would simply stand in a corner for hours, motionless, like a terrifying piece of organic sculpture. But we knew it was aware. We could feel its attention, a constant, low-level psychic hum in the background of our own thoughts. Chloe's connection with it had deepened, and it was changing her. She was becoming more listless, more detached from us. She would spend her days sitting near Silas, seemingly in a trance, a faint, serene smile on her face. She was eating less, sleeping less, and her skin had taken on a pale, translucent quality. It was as if the creature was feeding on her, not her flesh, but her energy, her vitality. Maya was the first to voice our shared fear. "It's hurting her," she said one night, as we watched Chloe sleep, her breathing shallow. "Every time it gets stronger, she gets weaker. It's some kind of psychic vampirism." Liam, who had been oiling his knife by the dying firelight, looked up, his eyes dark. I told you we should have killed it when we had the chance." "We can't think like that, Liam," I said, though the conviction in my own voice was fading. The pity I had once felt for the creature had been replaced by a cold, primal fear. The creature's influence on our environment was also escalating. The strange, rust-colored mold now covered almost an entire wall, and in the center of its fractal patterns, it had begun to glow with a faint, pulsing green light, the same sickly green as the light from the crashed ship. At night, it would cast the cabin in an eerie, underwater glow. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying smell, and we started to experience auditory hallucinations. Faint, melodic chimes, soft whispers just at the edge of hearing, and a low, resonant thrumming that seemed to come from the earth beneath the cabin. But the first major incident, the one that shattered any remaining hope of a peaceful resolution, happened on what we guessed was our 10th day in the cabin. We had run out of food. Our stash of canned goods and granola bars was gone. Desperation was setting in. Liam, ever the provider, announced he was going to take his rifle and hunt. A squirrel, a rabbit, I don't care. We need to eat. I decided to go with him. The thought of being alone in the cabin with Silas and the increasingly distant Chloe was more than I could bear. Maya stayed behind, reluctantly, to watch over my sister. The forest outside the cabin felt different. The normal sounds of the wilderness had returned, but they felt muted, distant, as if we were separated from the real world by a pane of thick glass. We were unsuccessful in our hunt. The forest seemed devoid of life. After a few hours, we started to head back, empty-handed and dejected. As we approached the clearing where the cabin stood, a sense of dread washed over me. The air was still, too still, and then we heard the scream. It was Maya, a raw, piercing shriek of pure terror. We broke into a run, fear lending us a speed we didn't know we possessed. We burst through the cabin door, our hearts pounding. The scene that greeted us was one of pure chaos. The cabin was in disarray. The table was overturned, our meager supplies scattered across the floor. Maya was huddled in a corner, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling uncontrollably. Chloe was standing by the wall of glowing mold, her back to us, completely unresponsive. And Silas was standing in the center of the room. In one of its long, three-fingered hands, it was holding a squirrel. The animal was limp, its neck broken. But that wasn't the horrifying part. The squirrel's body was changing. Its fur was receding, its skin turning a pale, shimmering gray. Its limbs were elongating, twisting into new, unnatural shapes. It was being remade, reformed on a cellular level into something else. Silas seemed to be absorbing it, not eating it but drawing its life force into itself. A faint, ethereal light flowed from the squirrel's body into the creature's hand. Liam raised his rifle, his face a mask of rage and disgust. "Get away from her!" he roared, aiming the gun at Silas. Before he could fire, Silas turned its featureless face towards him. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound, but the psychic force that slammed into us was like a physical blow. It was a wave of pure, undiluted terror, a command that bypassed our ears and went straight into our brains. "Do not." The rifle in Liam's hands began to shake violently. The wooden stock started to splinter, the metal barrel warping as if under intense heat. With a loud crack, the rifle twisted into a useless, mangled shape and fell from his hands. Liam stared at his empty, trembling hands, his face ashen. He had been so effortlessly, so contemptuously disarmed. Our one weapon, our one symbol of power, was gone. Silas dropped the now unrecognizable husk of the squirrel to the floor. It turned its attention back to Maya, who was sobbing in the corner. It was trying to get to Chloe," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the creature. "I tried to stop it. I got between them, and it looked at me, and I saw, oh God, Alex, I saw things. Inside my head. It showed me." She broke down into incoherent sobs. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture of terrifying clarity. The crash was not an accident. The creature wasn't a refugee. It was something else. A scout? A terraformer? I looked at the glowing wall of mold, at the way it was slowly remaking our small corner of the world. I looked at the twisted remains of the squirrel, at how its biological structure had been so easily rewritten. I looked at my sister, pale and distant, her life force being siphoned away to fuel this being. "It's not just a survivor," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's a seed. The crash, it was planting the seed. And we're the fertilizer." The cabin wasn't a refuge. It was a greenhouse, a laboratory, and we were the first experiment. That night, the dynamic shifted irrevocably. The pretense was over. We were no longer caretakers. We were prisoners. Prey. Liam was broken. The destruction of his rifle had destroyed his will to fight. He retreated into a shell of silent, simmering fear. Maya was traumatized, haunted by the visions Silas had shown her. She refused to speak about them, but would often wake up screaming. Only Chloe remained serene, a calm island in our sea of terror. She seemed to be in full communion with the creature now. Sometimes I would see them in the corner of the cabin, Silas standing motionless, and Chloe sitting at its feet, her head tilted as if listening to a silent conversation. She was lost to us. I knew we had to escape. It was our only chance. But how? Silas was always aware, and the world outside the cabin was becoming just as alien as the world inside. One night, I dared to look out the small, grimy window. The forest was no longer dark. The trees were covered in a faint, phosphorescent moss that cast the woods in a ghostly green and blue light. Strange fungal growths shaped like spiral shells and delicate, crystalline structures sprouted from the ground. The air was filled with floating, glowing spores that danced in the unnatural light. The woods were being terraformed, slowly but surely, into something else. An alien landscape. The external threat Liam had been so paranoid about also became a reality. One afternoon, I saw it through the window. A figure, standing at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by a tree. It wasn't human. It was tall and thin, wrapped in a dark, tattered cloak. It stood there for a long time, just watching the cabin, before melting back into the glowing woods. Was it another of Silas's kind? Or something else, drawn by the psychic energy emanating from the cabin? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out. We were trapped between a monster in the house and a world that was becoming monstrous. Our time was running out. The escalation was reaching its peak. Something was about to break, and I had a terrible feeling that we would be the ones to shatter. The breaking point came, as it was always going to, from within. It was born of fear, desperation, and a final, frantic betrayal. It had been, I think, 2 weeks. Time had lost its meaning. There was only the perpetual twilight of the cabin, lit by the ghastly green glow of the mold wall, and the oppressive, silent presence of Silas. We were starving not just for food, but for hope. We were ghosts, haunting the final hours of our own lives. Liam was the one who broke first. His paranoia had curdled into a desperate, feral cunning. He had been watching Chloe, watching her connection with the creature, and he had formed a terrible, logical conclusion. "It needs her," he whispered to me late one night, his eyes gleaming with a feverish intensity in the green light. We were huddled by the cold fireplace, as far from Silas and the sleeping Chloe as we could get. "She's its anchor, its battery. If she's gone, maybe it gets weaker. Maybe it can't hold us here anymore." "What are you saying, Liam?" I asked, a cold dread coiling in my stomach, though I already knew the answer. "We have to get her out," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We make a run for it. Just you and me. We take Chloe with us. We leave it behind." "And Maya?" I asked. Liam's gaze flickered towards Maya, who was sleeping fitfully in a chair, her face etched with the lines of constant terror. "She's too far gone, Alex. She won't leave. She's too scared." and it will slow us down. The casual cruelty of his words shocked me. This was my best friend, willing to abandon the woman he loved to save himself. The thing in the cabin wasn't just changing the environment. It was eroding our very souls, stripping away our humanity until only the raw instinct for survival remained. "No," I said, my voice firm. "We all go or none of us go. I'm not leaving my sister. And I'm not leaving Maya." Liam stared at me, his face hardening. "Then you're a fool," he hissed. "And you'll die here with them." He was wrong about Maya. She wasn't too far gone. She was terrified, yes, but she was also a fighter. The next day, I saw her watching Liam, a new awareness in her eyes. She had seen the change in him, too. She knew he was a danger. We formed a silent, desperate alliance, Maya and I. We communicated with glances, with subtle nods. Our plan was simple and suicidal. Wait for an opportunity, grab Chloe, and run. We didn't know where we would run to. The glowing, alien forest outside was almost as terrifying as the cabin. But it was a chance. It was movement. It was hope, however faint. Our chance came that night. Silas was standing in its usual corner, motionless. Chloe was asleep on the floor near it. Liam was pretending to sleep in his chair, but I could see the tension in his body. He was waiting. Maya caught my eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. I moved silently towards my sister, my heart hammering against my ribs. My plan was to scoop her up and make a break for the door. Maya was going to try to create a diversion to draw the creature's attention. But we had underestimated Liam's desperation, and we had underestimated the creature's power. As I bent down to lift Chloe, Liam sprang from his chair. But he didn't run for the door. He ran towards Silas. In his hand was the hunting knife he had been obsessively sharpening. "If you won't leave it, I'll kill it," he screamed, his voice a raw, ragged sound of pure madness. He lunged at the silent figure in the corner, the knife raised high. What happened next is a blur of surreal horror in my memory. Silas didn't move. It didn't even seem to notice Liam's attack. But as the knife began its downward arc, something else did. Chloe's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the warm, brown eyes of my sister. They were glowing with a faint, green light. She rose to her feet with an unnatural speed, a low, guttural growl emanating from her throat, a sound that was not human. She intercepted Liam, moving with a strength and speed that was impossible. She grabbed his wrist, stopping the knife just inches from Silas's body. The sound of his bones snapping was sickeningly loud in the silent cabin. Liam screamed, a sound of agony and disbelief. He dropped the knife, his arm hanging limp at his side. Chloe, or the thing that was wearing my sister's face, tossed him aside like a rag doll. He flew across the room and crashed into the far wall with a sickening thud, slumping to the floor, motionless. Maya screamed and ran towards him, and then Silas moved. It was no longer the slow, graceful being we had been living with. It was something else entirely, something ancient and terrible. His body began to contort, to change. Its limbs elongated further, its torso thickened. Its smooth, featureless face split open, revealing a swirling vortex of emerald light, a gaping maw of pure energy. The psychic pressure in the cabin became unbearable, a physical force that brought me to my knees. The glowing mold on the wall flared, bathing the room in a blinding green light. I was paralyzed, forced to watch as the creature's true form was revealed. It was a being of pure energy, barely contained within a physical shell. It was a nexus of power that was rewriting reality around it. It turned its attention to Maya, who was kneeling over Liam's still form. It raised one of its long, newly shaped arms. "No!" I screamed, scrambling to my feet, but it was too late. From the tip of its fingers, a bolt of green energy, a tendril of pure, solid light, shot out and struck Maya in the chest. She didn't even have time to scream. Her body convulsed, and then she simply dissolved. She turned into a cloud of shimmering, glowing particles that were drawn into the creature, absorbed into its being. One moment she was there, my friend, a living, breathing person. The next she was gone, food for a star god. The horror of that moment is indescribable. It broke something inside me. The last vestiges of my sanity, of my hope, crumbled to dust. I was next. I knew it. The creature turned its swirling vortex of a face towards me. I was frozen, waiting for the end. But then, something happened. Chloe, who had been standing, panting, her eyes still glowing, seemed to falter. She blinked, and for a fleeting second, the green light in her eyes faded. "Alex," she whispered, her own voice, faint and scared. "Run." That single word, that momentary return of my sister, broke the spell of my terror. It was a gift, a final act of love. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran. I burst through the cabin door and into the alien night. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I ran blindly through the glowing, twisted forest. The screams of my friends and the image of Maya's dissolution burned into my mind. The ground was soft and spongy, the air thick with glowing spores that clung to my clothes. Strange, musical sounds echoed through the trees, and shadowy figures flickered at the edges of my vision. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed at the edge of a stream, the water glowing with a faint bioluminescence. I lay there, gasping for air, my body shaking with sobs. I was alive. I had escaped. But I was the only one. I was the sole survivor of the horror in the cabin. A survivor who had lost everything. My friends, my sister, my world. I had looked into the face of the universe and seen not wonder, but a cold, predatory, and utterly alien indifference. And that knowledge, that memory, would be my prison for the rest of my life. I don't know how long I lay by that glowing stream. Hours? A day? Time had become a fluid, meaningless concept. My grief was a physical weight, a shroud that smothered all other thoughts and feelings. Liam, Maya, Chloe, their faces, their final moments, played on a loop in my mind, a private horror film from which there was no escape. Eventually, the instinct for survival, that stubborn, primal spark, forced me to my feet. I knew I couldn't stay there. The forest itself felt tainted, wrong. Every rustle of the strangely shaped leaves, every glow of the phosphorescent moss, was a reminder of the force that had consumed my friends. I followed the stream, hoping it would lead me to familiar territory, to a place that hadn't been touched by the alien presence. After what felt like an eternity of walking through that ghostly, transformed wilderness, I began to see signs of the old world. The trees looked normal again. The ground was firm beneath my feet. I heard the distant, familiar sound of a car. I stumbled out onto a paved road, a ghost emerging from a nightmare. I was a mess, caked in mud, my clothes torn, my face streaked with tears and dirt. A car swerved to avoid me, its horn blaring, the driver shouting something I couldn't understand. I had escaped the woods, but I knew I could never truly escape what had happened. My first instinct was to go to the police, to tell someone, to scream my story from the rooftops. But as I stood there, trembling on the asphalt, the full weight of my situation settled on me. Who would believe me? I was the sole survivor of a weekend camping trip gone wrong. My friends were missing. My sister was missing. And I was telling a story about a crashed spaceship, a telepathic alien, and a cabin that had become a gateway to hell. I would be the prime suspect. They would think I had killed them, that I had suffered a psychotic break. I would be locked away, my story dismissed as the ravings of a lunatic. And the truth, the terrible, world-changing truth, would be buried with me. And what if they did believe me? What if I could convince them? A shiver of a different kind of fear ran down my spine. The military would descend on that place. Scientists, government agents in black suits. They would try to capture it, to study it, to weaponize it. They would be like children poking a god with a stick. I had seen what that power could do. I had seen it erase a person from existence. The thought of that force being unleashed on the world, of a war being fought against something so far beyond our comprehension, it was a horror on a scale I couldn't even imagine. So I made another choice. A choice born of fear and a strange, twisted sense of responsibility. I would remain silent. I would disappear. And that's what I did. I never went back to Havenwood. I never contacted my family. To the world, Alex Miller is just another missing person, presumed dead, a tragic footnote in a local news story. I've been living on the fringes ever since, moving from town to town, working odd jobs for cash, never staying in one place for too long. I live in a state of constant paranoia. Every strange light in the sky, every unexplained phenomenon on the news, sends a jolt of fear through me. I am forever looking over my shoulder, terrified that I will see a tall, slender figure in the crowd, or that the world will start to change around me again. I am haunted by what I saw and by what I lost. I see Maya's face in my dreams, dissolving into light. I hear Liam's final scream, and I see Chloe, my beautiful, vibrant sister, her eyes glowing with a light that was not her own, giving me one last chance to escape. Was she a prisoner in her own body? Or did she become part of that cosmic being? Did she find the wonder she was always looking for? In the heart of that terrible, beautiful power? It's a question that keeps me awake at night. Which brings me to this recording. To you. Why am I telling you this now? Because the silence is eating me alive. And because I believe people need to know. Not the governments, not the military, but people like us. People who look into the wilderness and see more than just trees. People who know that there are secrets hidden in the shadows. This story is my protocol. My record of what happened. It is a warning. The thing in the woods, the seed that was planted in Northwood Park, I don't think it was the only one. How many other ships have crashed in remote corners of the world? How many other survivors have been found, taken in by unsuspecting, compassionate people? How many other cabins, other isolated places, are slowly being transformed into beachheads for an invasion we don't even know is happening? So I ask you to be careful. When you walk in the wilderness, listen to your instincts. If a place feels wrong, if the silence is too deep, if the air feels heavy, turn back. Run. Because we are not alone. And not everything that falls from the sky comes in peace. Some things come to plant a garden. And we are the soil. Thank you for listening to my story. I don't know what will happen to me after this. Maybe putting this out there is a death sentence. But the truth needed to be told. Stay safe, and keep watching the skies.